The contracts question from February of 1995 is a tricky UCC problem. Here's a hypothetical that requires us to pay particular attention to detail. Take a look with me at the call of the question. It reads, what rights and remedies does Neptune have against SUP? What damages, if any, might Neptune recover? And what defenses, if any, should SUP assert? Discuss. Well, we don't know what subject is being tested, but we know we're dealing with civil litigation. So Neptune is going to have one or more theories of liability in order to prevail against SUP. We know that the question is focusing our attention on remedies, so in torts we think about compensatory and punitive damages. In contracts we think about cover damages and consequential damages. We go to the top and we learn very quickly that we're dealing with contracts, and in fact we're dealing with a UCC problem involving merchants. In paragraph 1, we meet Neptune. Neptune is a restaurant located downtown, and they're famous for good food and good service, and they are especially well known for making salmon dishes. In paragraph 2, we find out about the contract between Neptune and Seafood Uptown Providers, SUP, and there are no formation problems here. We're not told anything about the offer, the acceptance. We know pretty clearly what this contract is for. And we move to paragraph 3. Here we have the problem that disrupts this contract. There's an oil spill that is widely publicized and nearby. The spill reduces the catch of salmon, and we see that on the open market the price of salmon goes up quite a bit. SUP then breaches by telling Neptune that it will only supply salmon at a price of $6 per pound, and Neptune wants to stick to the contract price. And we also see that the seller has found a new customer willing to pay $6 a pound, and it sells its whole supply to that new customer. But look carefully at that last sentence in paragraph 3. It indicates that the entire supply of SUP is 450 pounds of salmon per week. They've got more than enough salmon to be able to comply with their contract with Neptune. So although we may talk about impossibility and commercial impracticability, and in fact we're going to, still that's not going to afford this defendant a very good defense, because we know for sure, as a result of this paragraph, that Neptune would be able to get all of the salmon it needs if only SUP would choose to perform under the agreement. In paragraph 4, we see the owners of Neptune doing some fairly difficult decision-making. We see that they need salmon for their menu, and they are also concerned about the future. So they find a supplier that will cover half of their needs at $5 a pound. And we're told with further effort, Neptune could have found at least some of the remaining salmon that it needed for $6 a pound. But they are worried about the future possibilities for salmon, as far as it being available or not, and so they decide to change their menu. This is getting us to the consequential damages paragraph. Have a look at paragraph 5. Within a month of making these changes, Neptune experiences a 25% decline in restaurant business and a 75% decline in new bookings for catering jobs. Those are consequential damages, and we know that the rule for consequential damages is to be recoverable, they must be foreseeable to the breaching party at the time of the agreement. And it seems to me, given that this is a UCC agreement between merchants, that a merchant would expect another merchant to go and cover rather than make these drastic changes. Now, reasonable people can differ, and plenty of people wrote successful answers to this question, taking either side with regard to the recoverability of these additional damages. But my opinion, and I do think the majority opinion, is it is not foreseeable to SUP and therefore not compensable. In the next to the last paragraph, we find that Neptune still has some problems regarding the future of its salmon supply, and it wants to sue SUP. Then, finally, we get the call of the question once again. Well, up front, just looking at the call of the question, we're able to see that the plaintiff needed a theory of liability and a prayer for relief. Well, the call tells us that the prayer for relief is going to be based on damages. And we also know that the theory of liability is contracts. So turn the page and have a look at the outline of issues that I present, and you will see that I do a very simple, workmanlike, yet complete job. Neptune's rights derive from a contract theory of liability. So I talk about the contract. I explain that the UCC applies, including the merchant provisions, and then I point out that SUP has breached the agreement. This allows me to find a home for plenty of factual details, and it also allows us to set the stage for the damages analysis that follows. So, next, we turn to Neptune's remedies, and you'll see that I focus on expectation damages, the cover remedy, and then I focus on consequential damages, and I talk about each one of the possible consequential damages in a separately headed paragraph. Next, I focus on Neptune's duty to mitigate its damages, and here's where I think the plaintiff hurts itself by failing to just go for a cover remedy and thereby mitigating these possible consequential damages. Then I focus a little bit on specific performance. I realize that this is outside the scope of the call of the question, which really is focusing our attention on damages. But it does seem to me appropriate that a specific performance remedy analysis should be present here as well. You'll notice I'm not breaking it down into all the little elements of specific performance the way we do on a question that really calls for it. But I am touching on this remedy because we know that a plaintiff will want every possible remedy, and if there are facts to justify the analysis, it's worth putting in. Next, I turn to the defenses of SUP. Remember that a defendant in a contracts action really has three potential places of defense: defense to formation, defense to breach, and defense to remedies. In this question, we don't really have any facts that allow the defendant to contest the existence of a valid agreement. But we do have facts that allow the defendant to argue an impossibility and impracticability, and then I offer a couple of defenses to equitable relief as well, because I think it's appropriate under the facts. So, now, let's have a brief look at the model answer that I've written for this hypothetical, and you'll see, as always, I lead with the facts. I identify the parties, and I indicate up front that there's no real defense to the existence of this agreement. Then I focus on the special UCC merchant provisions, and again, notice how I meticulously report on the facts. I indicate what happened, and then I interpret it legally. Then, turning to breach, again, this is not a complicated problem with regard to either formation or breach. But we've got plenty of facts that go to breach, and you'll see how I carefully weave all of these details into the analysis on page 1 about the breach. Ultimately, I conclude this section by indicating that the plaintiff has got a valid theory of liability for breach of contract. Next, on the following page, I turn to the plaintiff's remedies, and I mention the defenses, but I allude to the fact that these defenses are going to be discussed later in their separate section, asked for in the second call of the question. So you'll see with regard to expectation damages, this is very simple. All I do is plug in the facts about the extent to which this plaintiff was able to get additional salmon on the open market. To the extent that this plaintiff is able to prove up damages, those expectation damages will be readily available to that plaintiff. And we realize the UCC prefers the damages remedy and even allows for the so-called economic breach of contract. Next, I turn to consequential damages. And although my outline had a separately headed section for each one of these consequential damages, when I actually wrote the answer, I put them all in 2 paragraphs with one big section on consequential damages. The duty to mitigate issue also isn't terribly complicated, but it does allow me to find a home for a couple of additional details, as well as some legal analysis with regard to the status of these 2 parties and the availability of damages to a non-breaching party who has failed properly to mitigate their damages. Then I talk about specific performance for just one little paragraph. Again, this is not an equitable relief problem, it's a damages problem. So I don't waste a lot of time on equity. But I don't think that 3 or 4 little sentences is a waste of time. Actually, I think it is most helpful because it completes an analysis of what the plaintiff's rights and remedies might conceivably be. Finally, in the last section, I turn to the defenses of SUP. They've got a defense to breach, and they've got a defense to specific performance. With regard to their defense to breach, it breaks up into impossibility and impracticability defenses, and here I point out that we don't really have enough facts to determine whether or not the cost of performing this agreement is substantially more expensive for SUP than it was at the time the contract was formed. Even I sort of acknowledge that depending on what the facts are, the defense of SUP with regard to impracticability may be a little stronger than I indicate it is, based on the facts we really do know about. I touch about specific performance again from the point of view of the defense, and I'm able to handle it in 2 comparatively short sentences. In the end, I conclude that SUP in fact has breached a valid agreement with Neptune, and it will not be excused from liability based on commercial impracticability or impossibility. I indicate that Neptune certainly will be able to recover every provable expectation damage, but I conclude that it will not recover any consequential damages. But remember, that's just my conclusion. Plenty of successful answers to this question reach the opposite result. But I think you'll agree, it's difficult to find an answer that has more comprehensive use of the facts than you'll see in this model answer.